good evening everybody. Week 9, can you believe it? Time has flown, hasn't it? Week 9. Okay, let's get into it. Unleash the power of your extraordinary life. You know what's coming. The 4 pillars for success. Could you please read that out with me? Knowledge creates awareness. Awareness enables clarity. Clarity fuels action. And action will change your life. So as Sharon has just said, it is what you do that is going to change your life. So you can learn a lot of things, and a lot of people are overeducated, but they don't actually apply what they've learned. So in the end, it's do the doing. Yes? Now, you all remember that it is what is on the inside of you that determines your performance, quality, and results of your life. So what are the 5 ingredients that determines more of 80% of whether you live an extraordinary life or an ordinary life? They are mind, emotions, body, spirit, and time. I think you can give yourself a hand of applause. That's excellent. Well done. You know that by now. Okay. Tonight we have a very, very, very exciting topic, and it is how to predict behavior. How to predict behavior. Now let me show you where it all fits in. Remember we spoke about the fact that you live in 2 worlds. Everyone's familiar with this? And we have our inner world and our outer world. Well, I don't know whether you've noticed, I'm sure you have, but your outer world is full of people. Absolutely. They are everywhere, from your family to your colleagues, to your friends, to your neighbors. The one thing that you cannot escape is people. Even if you hate being with people, you really can't escape being in relationship with people. So, and you yourself, of course, is a person. So understanding how people behave and why they behave in a certain way is certainly very, very beneficial. Now, an increased understanding of others leads to an awareness of how people are predictably different. Who has noticed that people are not the same? Yeah? Like, a lot of people think people's behavior is random. Does anyone in the room think that people behave randomly? You'll be forgiven to do so. I hear that all the time. I just can't get people. They just behave so randomly. I just cannot understand why that person acted so-and-so or did so-and-so or said so-and-so. And I get that a lot in my work. A lot of what I do is help people predict how other people will behave so that they can influence the situation. Does that make sense? Excellent. So let's just catch up on the PowerPoint. So the inner world and the outer world. The outer world's full of people, and we just cannot escape people, because our lives revolve around other people. So, I've got good news. People may be different, but they are predictably different. Predictably different. Now, who has taken any of the personality tests, like Myers-Briggs, Personality Plus? You're familiar with those? Yes? Okay. Have you found that they really explain people's behavior? To a certain extent they do, don't they? But not in people's entirety. And this is what I found. There is no one system that really describes or explains how people behave. And so I found that there are a few, of which I'm going to show you the 2 most important ones tonight, or the two systems that I find most beneficial. But they're not the only 2 that have an influence on what people do, but we'll get through 2 tonight. Is that okay? Great. So, how to read people. Would you agree that how to read people is a very important skill for living an extraordinary life? Who can live an extraordinary life while having terrible relationships with other people? No one. Yes? If you're in bad relationship with people, your life cannot be extraordinary. If you're fighting and if things are going wrong all around you in your dealings with other people, it's hard to have an extraordinary life. So I want you all to create extraordinary relationships as part of that extraordinary life, and starting with an extraordinary relationship with you, with yourself. Okay, so let's look at what I have found the most beneficial systems. So I've mentioned this to you before. Remember Maya Angelou, that should be. Maya Angelou said, If someone shows you who they are, believe them. If someone shows you who they are, believe them. And what I found is too many people don't believe what other people show them, because you live in hope that what you are seeing is just not so. But I'm saying, if someone shows you who they are, believe them. But what do you look at? Like if we say someone showed you who you are, what is it that you should look at for someone to show you who they are? And I've deciphered that for you. So, how do people reveal themselves to you? In 4 ways, really. And here they are. Number 1, how the person acts and behaves. Secondly, how the person looks, so the person's appearance. Third, how the person relates to other people. And fourth, how the person communicates. So the 4 sources of information: act, appearance, how people relate to each other, and how people communicate. So, the 2 most useful people prediction tools that I have found are the following: the Trisona system and the VAC system. We've touched on the latter one. We've touched on visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that tonight. The Trisona system and the VAC system. Okay. So would you all agree that people are a little bit complicated? Yes? And you all agree that understanding what other people do is, or why they do that, is beneficial? Yes? So what I'm asking you to do is to become people scholars. Some of this stuff you really need to learn, and you need to learn how to apply it to really get benefit from it. Does that make sense? But I'm going to decipher some of people's behavior for you tonight. Right, so let's look at the Trisona system first. Okay, so we have a continuum here. On the one end, we have task. On the other end, we have people. That doesn't seem like they are opposites, but they are. When it comes to behavior, task and people are completely opposite. And I'm going to explain it to you in the simplest way I can. So we can divide this continuum into 3 sections. The first one is about there. The second one is about there. And then there's the third section. Does that make sense? So first section, second section, third section. So we'll say out of, these are 10 people. 10 people in this line here. So 10 people, of which 2 people will live in this section, 7 people will live in that section, and 1 person will live there. Does that make sense? You're still following me? Okay. Now let's talk just briefly about why we have task and why we have people. People tend to lie somewhere on this line. Either they focus most on tasks, or they focus most on people, or they lie somewhere in between. Does that make sense? So people who like focusing on tasks, do you think they like being with other people? They do not. They like being on their own, working. And what I found was really, really interesting is the fact that about 90% of my clients live here. They live in the task section. Why? Because it's the doing that gets results. Remember that? It's the action that gets results. So I get to work with people who like doing things, then they get promoted, they're really good at their job, they get promoted to be managers, and then they're poor at managing people. In fact, they love hiding in their offices. I don't want to work with people. If they had a choice, they would prefer not to be with people at all. Does that make sense? Okay, so task people like doing things on their own. But what I want to show to you is that we all have a section on this line. So it's not that you just a little dot. You're on a section here. So you might have predominantly task and a little bit of people, or you might have half and half, or you might have a little bit of task just on the border and more people, or you might move away from task towards people, or you might be very, very people orientated, which means that really you don't like doing things and you're kind of incapable of doing a lot of stuff, getting stuff done. Does that make sense? Now, one thing that might make it a little bit complex is you can in fact have a little bit of task as well as a little bit of that. That is possible. But people, this is very rare, and people who have task and very people have a lot of conflict within themselves because they want to do stuff, but they also want to be with people. So what do? Then it doesn't matter what you do, you're kind of not doing what you love. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's look at task people too. So out of 10 people, we'll have 2 task people. And they are what we call loners. Why? Because they don't like being with other people. Does that make sense? So we have the loners there. We have the team players in the middle. And we have the talkers right at the end. So the more people orientated you are, the more you love talking. Sorry. So let's start with loners. Now, I'm going to run through a list of characteristics of loners, and this is the way I apply this information. I don't question why people are loners or why things are the way they are. I just see someone's behavior and I understand that they are a loner or a team player or a talker, or at any point in time they are displaying the characteristics of one of those. Does that make sense? So it's not about understanding why are they loners, why are they team players, or why are they talkers. It's more a case of understanding which one they are and being able to predict based on that what they're going to do next, and how you can adjust your own behavior to influence that person or to create a loving relationship with them or just to be happy. Does that make sense? Okay, excellent. So, starting with loners. Out of 10 people, 2 people will be loners, and this is what they'll do. I'm going to put it up on the board because there's a lot of information you can read through. All of this is contained in my book, so if you want to take notes, you can. You don't have to. You'll get a copy of it anyway. So, they think about work first. They think about work first. If you ask a loner out for coffee and they have to mow the lawn, do you know what they're going to say? No. No, I can't come because I have to mow the lawn. And if you're a people person, you're going to be really hurt by that. You're going to go, what? You'd rather mow the lawn than be with me? Can't believe that that would be true. But understanding that that person's a loner then makes it not personal. It's not about you. It's actually about them. Does that make sense? Okay, so they think about tasks first. They always have a list of tasks and goals that they want to complete and accomplish. Every morning they get up with a list in their mind. I have one client, she's only young, she's 17, and she's very, very task orientated. And she, if anything gets in the way of her accomplishing her list in her mind, she gets really cranky. And I think that's why her parents called me in, because she just is not flexible at all. Like, she wants to get up, then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And if anything gets in the way, it's a big deal. Does that make sense? So they always see and focus on the risk, the danger, or the potential harm of any situation. I cannot emphasize that enough. So you tell a loner that you're going to do something. Do you know what they'll tell you? Why not to? So if you're looking for encouragement, don't tell a loner what you're about to do. But if you're looking for someone to point out the risks to you, which is really helpful if you live on this side, because even though you can't see risk when you live here, it still exists. So your mind just doesn't see the risk automatically, where these people's minds just automatically see risk. So if you're a person who lives in the people side, ask a loner, because they'll tell you what could go wrong and you can make a plan to prevent that from happening. So instead of getting annoyed by people saying, oh, but this can go wrong and that can go wrong, use it to your advantage. Does that make sense? So the next thing is, they will always focus on what is wrong. They'll walk into a room, there'll be 10 pictures, 9 of them will be perfectly straight, 1 will just be off-center and they'll only see the off-center one, which is sometimes hard, but that's a really good thing for them because they can show you what the problem is. They tend to be cautious in their approach, they're pessimistic, they're somewhat prone to depression, they're sometimes negative, they require a lot of information in their decision making. Who has already recognized that someone that they're dealing with is a loner? Yes? And is that person asking you more questions than you're able to answer? About everything? Yes. So if you're dealing with a loner, if you're in a relationship with a loner, that's okay. They're going to require a lot of information. Do your very best to prepare, but there will come a point where you'll just say, I don't know. I don't. Because they're going to keep asking until you don't know anymore. Does that make sense? And that's okay. That's because they're loners. Not because they're trying to catch you out or trying to be nasty. It's just because they have a need for a lot of information. So they focus on the detail. And as I mentioned to you before, a lot of my clients live there. Oh my goodness, that's one of the hardest challenges. Getting someone to not look at that little bit and make it that big, but for someone to see the big picture. Because if you're a loner, it's really difficult for you to see the big picture. And so the question, remember how we can change our minds with questions? If you're a loner, the question is, what's the big picture? What is the real, what's everything here? Not just that little thing that can go wrong. And this is really, really important too. They have a very high standards. Higher standards than anyone else. But they will still not feel like they have done a good job. Still not feel that they've done a good job. I have one lady who's my client. She works in a project environment. She's doing a brilliant job. And every session I see her starts with, I don't think I'm doing a good job. And all the feedback from her environment is, you're doing great. But for her, it's not good enough. She's not living up to her own expectations of herself. Yet she's outperforming everyone else. Does that make sense? And so she needs to learn to live with that within herself and to use that to her advantage and not to get so depressed by the fact that she's not doing well enough that it starts declining her performance. Does everyone understand what I'm saying? So I'm going to go through this quickly. They tend to be perfectionists. I'm going to skip a few. They are analytical. They love to compare detailed information. These people are typically accountants, engineers, detail people, analytical kind of people. They procrastinate because they are unsure of the best course of action. So what I found is pretty much everyone here has a tendency every now and again to procrastinate. But if you're a loner, you procrastinate because you haven't analyzed enough detail yet. You haven't looked at enough information. You don't feel like you know exactly what the right course of action is. This is very important too. Even though loners feel uncomfortable in the presence of others, they are very tolerant and respectful of others. So they'll speak professionally, they'll be nice on a very kind of detached way, professional way, but they respect other people. And they dislike social gatherings, especially crowds. You ask a loner to come to a party and they really don't want to. And they start worrying about the party weeks in advance. They don't want to go to large groups of people. They don't like it. They prefer smaller groups, and if you must socialize, no more than 6 people. That's the maximum that they can handle. They're conscientious. They're very creative sometimes. You know people who are really, really creative, but they're kind of depressed, and they kind of live in their own world, and they see things very differently to everyone else. It's because they're there. They're a lot of task orientation there, and they don't want to be with other people. So, and this is a key, they never feel lonely. They love that loneliness is not an emotion that they know. They're just not familiar with it. They don't know what it feels to be lonely, yet they know what it feels to be depressed because they're somewhat prone to it. Okay, so moving on to the team player. Out of 10 people, we'll have 7 team players to a greater or a lesser extent, depending on how they move on this line. Is everyone with me? Depending on where they sit on this line. Okay, so the team player. Do you think they like to be with people? Yes, absolutely. They are people-minded, they are people-orientated. Just can I take one step back? If you're an employer and you're looking for a team, and the work that you have to do, I'm thinking of you, Nikki, what's really detailed and artistic. You want to employ someone like this. They'll do a really good job for you because it will be perfect. And they'll do a really, really good job, and they'll do the detail, and it will be really, really good outcome for you. But team players are people who can work steadily towards a task and get it done. Now, team players have one kind of fault, and that is they are prone to what's called the PREMAC principle. And what that means is a team player will take as long as they have to complete any task. You give someone who is a team player a task, and you don't give them a deadline, they'll take a day if they have a day. Does that make sense? They will not get it done just to get it done. And also, they like doing things together. So you ask a team player to move that table, they'll go, oh, who's going to help me? And be careful of your back and watch your ankle and all that. A task-orientated person will get in and move the table. Does that all make sense? Okay, other little details of team players, they're very family-orientated. They tend to be optimistic. They are communicative and enjoy speaking to other people, but they're kind of even people. They're even people. And do you know what a bell curve looks like? A bell curve is always in the middle, and it goes something like that. So the majority of the world are team players, and they're steady and they're stable kind of people, and they love their families, and so they keep society together. And what's really important about these people is they hate change. They want things to stay the same. They want things to stay the same because they want things to be stable for them and their families. They are casual and reserved. Let's move on. They tend to slow down and become passive-aggressive. I want to highlight that. You push a team player to do something that they don't want to do. They also want to be in control of a situation, and the way in which they'll do that is to slow down. They'll go slower and slower, and you'll become more and more frustrated, and they'll go slower and slower, and they'll be in control, and you'll be trying to push or pull, but you won't be able to. They tend to hold a grudge. Yes, they desire stability, and they're reliable and amicable. And finally, they take it very personally and feel like the other person has questioned your character and integrity when you're criticized or questioned about a task. I'll tell you a story. I recently dealt with 2 business partners, one who lives there and the other one lives about there. And oh my goodness, they fought because the task-orientated person didn't feel like the other person was doing a good enough job, and the people-orientated person felt like the task-orientated person was questioning their integrity. So do you see how the one is all about task and the other one is all about who you are? Versus not what you did, but the being. Remember the be, do, have? It's all about who you are, not versus what you do. Where for task-orientated people, it's all about what you do and not who you are. And so it's getting that balance right. But if you're in a relationship with someone and you know that that's the case, you can balance it out and you can understand each other and you can accept each other and respect the strengths that you bring. The talker. The talker is someone who lives right here. So 1 out of every 10 people are talkers. And they are very sociable, they're very disorganized, they're everybody's friend, and they can hardly get any work done whatsoever. You're getting a look. But everybody likes them. And they like to be the center of attention. And what they do really well is they sell stuff really well. They're natural persuaders. They love persuading people. And so they're the natural salespeople of the world, which is good because sales, they don't have to do anything. Like they don't have to tick stuff and fill stuff in and have an organized filing cabinet and so forth. Does that make sense? Because they just like to talk with people. They like to be with people all the time. I know a talker, she used to be a colleague of mine, and she used to always say, I wish someone would come in and just organize me. And her definition of being organized is having a cup with all your pens on your desk, because she could never find a pen. Never ever. She had brilliance, but it was always lost in the other stuff, rumble, jumble in her life. This is another one characteristic of a team player that I want to point out to you, is that people who are team players like to gather stuff, they like to hoard stuff, they like to have it and not need it, rather than need it and not have it. Do you know someone like that? They want to have their stuff with them, and they want to have it if they need it. Okay, so back to talkers. They're very sociable, they're open and approachable, they're loud, they're laughing all the time, they're fun, and as I said, they like to persuade others. They're natural salespeople. They enjoy being the center of attention, they are disorganized, spontaneous, opinionated, dislike routine, and will openly display emotions. The other thing about these people is they'll always tell you their faults. So they'll come into any conversation and within the first 5 minutes I'll tell you what's wrong with them. I always find it fascinating when people start telling, oh, but I'm really not good at that, and you know, my feet are this, and my hair does that, and I'm like, I don't know you from a bar of soap. But talkers do that. They love telling you everything that's wrong with them. They tend to really be emotional. That's something to take a note of. But they have great people skills. These are the people who can ring anyone up, make a friend instantly, and persuade that person to do something. And relationships is really important to them. So I have another client who lives somewhere there. And this is a really good place to live, be a people person, a talker, if you have some task orientation. If you have no task orientation, it's difficult because you just don't have a systematic way of thinking or doing things, and you can't get much done other than talk to people. So if you live there, you have to be in sales. That's the very, very best place for you to be. Most people's personalities comprise of a combination of team players, loners, and talker elements. However, people will tend to have a prominent persona. Okay, so this is key. You want to look at someone and say where they are in the moment. Because as I said to you, people have different degrees of being loners, team players, and talkers. And so they'll have a predominant one anyway, but you want to look at the situation where they are right then and say, okay, now they're focusing on the detail and they want to get the task done, so they're a loner at the moment. So I need to relate to that person as if he's a loner. Or they're more in a team player mode, so you can relate to them as team players. So I'm going to show you how to relate to people very quickly, to the different kinds. So 1 talker out of every 10, 2 loners, and 7 team players. So how do you relate to all these different kinds of people? How do you relate to a loner? What do? You communicate in a low-key and a professional manner. I have an appointment with a loner on Thursday. He's the boss of one of my clients, and I have to tone it down so much. I have to go, calm, calm, calm. And then when I get into his office, I have to keep reminding myself to speak slowly and softly, and to listen more than talk, and just be calm, because he's very professional. He is a loner. He doesn't like loud and happy, and he doesn't do happy. He does professional. You must be prepared. Oh, and that's the other thing. I always prepare for my meetings with him. Why? Because he's going to ask me questions. He's going to ask me questions and questions and questions, and I need to at least be able to answer 95% of his questions until I can no longer say anything. I'll go, no, I don't know. And then at least if that's just the 5%, then I'm okay. have to give them a lot of information. And do you know how to build rapport with a loner? Because they're not people, you want to take interest in something that they're interested in. So you're not going to be overly friendly with them. You're going to try and find out, are they a fishing person, or they're a boating person, or they like this or that, and take interest in the thing that they're interested in instead of in them. Does that make sense? So you won't ask, how was your vacation? You'll ask, how did the fishing go? Does that make sense? You're focusing on the task instead of on them. What you should not do is talk about other people to loners. They don't like it. Don't be over friendly or loud. They do not like that at all. Don't flatter them. Don't try and flatter them. They don't like that. They tend not to trust other people. So when you flatter a loner, they think, what are you up to? Do you know what I mean? What are you up to? What do you want? Don't criticize them. Because these people have high standards and because they measure everything on task, what happens if you criticize a loner? You get to the heart of them. That's like the worst thing you can do to a loner. You can reject them, that's okay. But don't criticize a task because everything's measured on task. And do not be pushy. Do not be pushy. What can you expect from a loner? You want to spend a lot of time alone. They ask detailed questions. They want a lot of information. They want to do things. And sitting and talking is not an activity for them. It's not something that they enjoy doing. They'll rather be doing stuff. And they really try to avoid social functions at any cost. And there's a lot more. Just pick out a few. They tend to be very good at their job and they love anything that improves their standards or efficiency. It's all about task. See? But team players are very different. So what should you do to a team player? Where with a task-orientated loner, you should not be overly friendly. To a team player, you should be their friend, but still you shouldn't be too friendly because they are very stable people. So just be friendly. Build rapport and trust. That's very important. Be reserved, be casual, and maintain plenty of eye contact. Again, don't be pushy, don't rush. Do not rush a team player. They don't like it. And don't introduce change. They want things to stay the same. And do not be loud and overly friendly because again, they mistrust that. And you can expect them to be steady, not quick to make any decisions, slow down when feeling pressured, which we've touched on, and they tend to be very consistent. So the way they were yesterday is the way they are today is the way they'll be tomorrow. So consistent kind of people. And then finally, talkers. We must do. What should you do? Talkers are party kind of people. So what should you do? Be their friend. Be loud. Be happy. Have a chat. Be flattering. I did this with one of someone's team once, and there was a talker in the team, and she said, the best thing you can say to me is, my hair looks nice. That's like the best compliment she can ever get is about her hair. She loves being flattered. Be chatty, but be sincere. And don't be boring. Bore them. Do not bore them with a lot of detail. So do you see how these are detailed people? These people don't like detail at all. So if you put these two people in the room together, do you think they'll relate well? No, they'll have great difficulty relating. They will mistrust the talker, and the talker will think these people are boring, and so it just doesn't go very well. But opposites attract, and I see people, a talker and a people person, or a loner, and a people person marry each other, and unless they can work out how to relate, it's a bit hard. Yes? Do not make a talker feel like you would rather be doing stuff than spending time with them. Because these people's greatest fear is being rejected. Criticize them as much as you like. You can tell them that they're disorganized. They'll probably agree with you. As long as you can still be their friend, that's okay. You just want to be your friend. Okay, so be fun-loving, be positive. This is what you can expect, that they're positive and outgoing. They can be quite disorganized. They're very friendly. They do not handle rejection well. And you can expect them to be overly emotional. So, That's the trisona system. Here's where it becomes a little bit interesting. Remember how I said there are lots of different systems and they explain some of what a person does. But what I found is you cannot take one system and predict someone's behavior with one system. You can to a certain extent, but you can't get into the intricacies of them. And so what I have done is I have started to mix different systems together, and that's what I want to really get to today. I want to show you how taking the trisona and putting together with it the VAC and how they interrelate and interact with each other really creates very different people. But it's still very predictable. As soon as you know the trisona and the VAC, that'll explain about 80% of that person's behavior. Does that make sense? Okay, so let me show you quickly. I'm just going through the basics and then I'm going to put the two together. So, the VAC. Now remember we said that people rely on their senses to gather information from their environment, yes? And anyone who is a teacher is very familiar with the learning styles of visual, auditory and kinesthetic. But what I have found is the fact that it goes way beyond how you learn. It actually influences the way you live. It influences everything you are, the way you do things, the way you dress, the way you speak. It's all influenced by which sense you rely on to gather information from your environment. And I'll tell you a couple of interesting stories of how changing, because this is you're able to change this. By changing it, changes how you live and how you interact with your environment. So let's just get through the basics in a minute. So our VAC is the acronym for visual, auditory and kinesthetic. VAC describes the sensory preference that each person has for receiving information and interacting with their environment. Everyone understand that, yes? So we said we have 5 senses: eyes, ears, smell, taste and feeling. People do not rely on their taste and smell predominantly. They rely either on eyesight, hearing or feeling. So, let me take this off the board and I'll show you briefly how that works. Okay, so you have either your eyes. I'll have a go at drawing an eye. Or your ears, or I don't know, is that right? Or your nose. Do a profile. Nose. Okay. So, no, not nose. What am I talking about? Sorry, I just said not nose. Your feeling. So kinesthetic is another word for motion, which talks about how you feel, how you sense, not only with your skin, but also just how you experience things. So we all know kinesthetic learners learn by doing stuff more than seeing or hearing, but we'll get to that. So, if you prefer to rely on your sight, you will be known as visual, yes? If you prefer to rely on your hearing, you'll be known as auditory, and if you prefer to rely on your touch and your bodily feeling, you'll be known as kinesthetic. Everyone understand that so far? Wonderful. So what does that mean? By gaining a working knowledge of this tool, you will further improve your understanding of other people and your ability to relate and build rapport with others. So I'm going to step you through how whether you're visual or auditory or kinesthetic influences the way you live. I think this is incredibly interesting. So visual people will rely most on their eyes. So for visual people, appearances are extremely important. In fact, I always know a visual person by looking at their nails. People who have their nails done are visual people. People who always are perfectly presented are visual people. People who have their desks neatly set out are visual people. Visual people wear brightly colored clothes. Their cars are clean because how things look are really important to them. Does that make sense? Now, as opposed to kinesthetic people, again, let me just quickly point this out too. You have, obviously we all rely on all of our senses, so you'll have a scale. You'll either be kinesthetic first, then auditory, then visual, or you'll be visual, kinesthetic, auditory. You'll have kind of a preference, number 1, number 2, number 3. Does that make sense? So your 2 and 3 does influence how you live, but let's just, that makes it a little bit complex. So let's just forget that for a sec. If you are visual, how you look is incredibly important. If you are kinesthetic, how you feel is incredibly important. So will a kinesthetic person wear nice shoes but uncomfortable shoes? Never, never. Visual people will not be able to walk, but they'll wear beautiful shoes. They'll be like this into the room, but the shoes will look really, really good. Where a kinesthetic person will never wear shoes that are uncomfortable. In fact, you know a kinesthetic person by looking and seeing that they are not wearing a belt. Their clothes are really comfortable. They kind of relax in their chairs. They're not like visual people who sit nice and upright and they have everything neat in front of them. Kinesthetic people are more like soft, relaxed people who have wearing soft clothes. They will wear, they'll always feel the fabric of something before buying it. They will never buy or wear something just because it looks good. If it's not comfortable, it's not in their wardrobe. Does that make sense? Very different to visual people. Auditory people you cannot tell from their appearance because it depends on whether they are visual second or kinesthetic second. So if you have an auditory person and you have a visual number 2, then that person will look good. If you have an auditory person with a kinesthetic number 2, they'll be comfortably dressed with comfortable shoes. Okay? Now I'm going to tell you a story to help you relate to that a little bit better. So we have 3 people and they're all coming to buy a new car. And 1 visual, 1 auditory, and 1 kinesthetic. So the salesperson walks to the visual person. What does the visual person want to do with a car? Want to see it. Yes? They don't want to talk to the salesperson. They want to see the car. So they're the people who go, can you show me the car? And because they're visual, they use all the visual words. So I want to see the car. Can you show me the car? I want to see the color. I want to, is it clear? Is it vibrant? All the seeing words, okay? If you're good at sales and you're able to pick a visual person, what will you be saying back? You look so good in that car. Can you see yourself driving it? Can you see how good you'll look? Can you see yourself going on vacation in it? And what color do you think a visual person will pick in cars? Red. They like bright colors. They wear bright colors too, okay? Where an auditory person, what does an auditory person want to do about a car, with a car? Do they want to see the car? No. They want to talk about the car. They want to hear words about the car, conversation. They want to hear the engine and they want to hear the stereo. That's all. They don't need anything but that. So if you're good and you're a salesperson and you can pick that it's an auditory person, you'll be talking about the car. You'll start the car so that they can hear the engine and you'll turn on the stereo so that people can hear the music. Does that make sense? Very different to if you're visual. Now, kinesthetic people. So a kinesthetic person walks into the showroom, no belt, comfortable shoes, comfy clothes. They want to buy a car. Do they want to see a brightly colored car? No. Do they want to talk about the car? No. What do they want to do? They want to, well, everyone will want to know the price. True. But they will want to experience what it's like to drive the car. They want to feel if the seat is comfortable. They want to feel if it's a comfortable ride. They want to know whether the seat can adjust, whether it has a thing in the back, whether it has a support, whether you can feel every bump. A very different way to buying a car from a visual person. In fact, if you're a visual person and kinesthetic last, you will probably buy a car and not notice whether the seat's comfortable or not, because it doesn't matter to you. It doesn't matter. How the car looks matters. But if you're kinesthetic, you'll never buy a red car, but you'll buy a car with a comfortable seat, you'll buy a car with a smooth ride, and if you're auditory, you'll buy a car with a good stereo. Does that make sense? A good radio. So do you see how different, whether you're visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, actually makes you live completely differently and relate to other people completely differently? Now, I'm going to quickly go through what the characteristics of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic are. Again, I'm going to skip over some, but visual people obviously rely on their eyes. They're good at seeing pictures in their mind. Auditory people go, because you can only hear one sound at a time, your brain works this, then this, then this, then this. Visual people's minds do not work like that at all. Visual people just have this one jumble of information which they can recall, and they can see a whole heap of pictures in their mind. So my lovely husband Walt used to be really visual, and he used to have difficulty go process this, then this, then this, then this, because visual people don't think that way. They see everything at the same time. I have another client whose husband's visual as well, and she always complains that he just goes, when he starts talking, it's like blah. All of this information just comes out at the same time in no particular order, and she's like, what? It's too much information, because he just sees this picture in his mind and he's just verbalizing everything he's seeing. Does that make sense? So, remember how I said you can change whether you're visual, auditory, or kinesthetic? So Walt did some training and he became more auditory. And it's a brilliant combination to have visual and auditory, because the visual allows you to remember a lot of information at the same time. You have a good memory, you're good at spelling, you're a good reader. But having that auditory as the second one allows you to be process-driven. So, because it's all in time. Does that make sense? You can't hear a lot of sounds at the same time. You hear this, then this, and this, and this. And so that process-drivenness together with the visual aspect is really good combination. So let's go back to visual. They have difficulty comprehending long conversations. If you employ a visual person and you telling them what to do, like my assistant, she's very visual. How do I know? My kids can be making the biggest noise in the world. She'll just keep working. It doesn't bother her at all. Not at all. Where I'm auditory, the noise around me really bothers me. I can't concentrate. But anyway, so with my assistant, what do? I draw a picture, I make a list, and I say, this is what I want you to do, but I always have a visual and step her through. Does that make sense? Because if I give my assistant a long verbal instruction, she's not going to do it all, because she doesn't have the ability in her mind to listen to 20 minutes of me speaking. Not like you, of course. Okay. People, whether you're visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, how do you tell whether someone's visual, auditory, or kinesthetic other than what their appearance is? Do you know? You listen to the words that they use. Visual people use visual words like see, look, picture, clear, reveal, focus. In their vocabulary, those are the words that they'll be using. Where with auditory people, they'll use auditory words. So they stand and sit with their bodies erect, they're neat. Visual people have everything nice, visual, nicely ordered in front of them. They are quite often very good at spelling. Auditory, I'm not good at spelling. I never understand why until I learned the stuff. Visual people are good at spelling because they see the word in their mind. Auditory people try and spell a word on how it sounds, and it's never spelt the way it sounds. It's spelt the way it is, yes? So visual people are really good at spelling, where auditory people are not, and kinesthetic, depending on whether they're auditory or visual second, will be good or not. They respond well to highly descriptive language. So if you paint a picture with words, they'll respond well to it. Auditory, I'll just touch on the words that they use. Manner of speaking, listen, hear, let's talk. Did you hear that? It's been great talking to you. It's all about listening and talking and hearing. For last respond. Well, if you're talking to an auditory person, will very easily be able to recall conversations verbatim. That's very important. So if you are remotely tired, bored, or uninterested, they will know. They will know, because that's what they're picking up on, the tone of your voice. Now, kinesthetic people. Okay, so I was going through this stuff with one of my other clients. He goes, I know he's kinesthetic. How do I know he's kinesthetic? He speaks extremely slowly. Kinesthetic people speak extremely slowly. It's got nothing to do with their intelligence. It's got to do with the way in which they pass their words over how they feel about something. So instead of just responding, they take a moment and subconsciously, this happens without their conscious awareness, checks how they feel. So I'm going through this with him. I know he's kinesthetic. He says, I am not kinesthetic because I do not like touchy-feely people. I don't like being touched. That's not what being kinesthetic is about. Being kinesthetic is being in touch with how you feel. And these people are really, really good at trusting their gut, because that is what they're in touch with. Does that make sense? And then we go through this whole thing, and then he said, well, maybe I am kinesthetic because I like meeting people in person because I want to get a gut feel for them. Not I want to see what they look like or want to hear what they have to say, as I would say. He wants to get a gut feel for what they're like based on something that happens in his body. Does that make sense? Okay. So you get that we have auditory, kinesthetic, and visual, auditory, visual, and kinesthetic people. Now I want to quickly, briefly touch on the interaction between whether you're a loner or a team player or a talker and back. Everyone ready for that? Okay. So let's draw this again. You have task, you have people. We have our loners here. We have our team players. And we have our talkers. So let's just we'll start with these people. Loners versus visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So what do we know about loners? Loners like to work. They like to be on their own. They like a lot of information. And they like detailed stuff, analyze things. Yes? Now, how will a visual loner be different from, say, a kinesthetic loner? Just answer that question for yourself in your mind for a moment. How will a visual loner be different to a kinesthetic loner? Okay, so if a loner, those things will stay the same. Like a lot of detail, high standards, like doing things, like being on their own, that remains the same. However, if a loner is visual, they will have all of their hundreds of pieces of paper, lots of information, all piled neatly on their desk. And when you ask them a question, they will respond immediately. However, if that same loner with the same hundreds of papers is a kinesthetic person, you ask them a question and it takes a minute for them to respond. So nothing to do with intelligence. It's all about how they're using their body to try and understand what it is that they have to respond to and how they feel about what they have to say. Also, you have a kinesthetic loner. Their desk is a nightmare because it's all about being comfortable. It's not about having things neat in front of them. It's just paper everywhere, and you'll have paper on the floor and you'll have files on the wall, and it'll be messy. And their chair will be comfortable. In fact, it might be, the fabric might be coming undone if that's a kinesthetic loner, where a visual loner will have one of those really nice chairs that almost looks like a throne. Have you seen those? With a nice leather seats and leather and so forth. So can you see how whether you're visual, I'm kinesthetic, and the same persona thing is a completely different person, different result. Can you understand that? Now, so that's the challenge that I want to set for you. Take those two systems, and there are a couple of others that do play into what we do. But if you can take just those two systems and master them and be able to pick whether who you're talking to or interacting with or married to or in relationship with or working with is a loner, a team player or a talker, and whether they are visual, auditory or kinesthetic, that will allow you to do a few things. Number one, it'll allow you to respect the contribution that that person will make. Because as people, we have this thing that if someone's different to you, then you don't necessarily respect what they bring to the table. Like if you're a talker and someone's alone and they keep telling you what can go wrong, that's not necessarily something that you'll appreciate. But it is, in knowing this, something that you need to respect because it's important to know. So that's number one. Number two, instant rapport. If you want to build instant rapport with someone, you pick them and you adjust your own behavior to be loner, team player or talker by toning yourself down or making yourself a little bit more lively or just being steady. And then pick the language that they are using and you'll have instant rapport with that person. What does that mean? Instant great relationship. Instant ability to influence their behavior. I think that is incredibly valuable. Incredibly valuable. And often it's, you want to, like if you're a teacher, you want to be able to influence your students for their own benefit. You want to be able to influence your students for their own good. And so if you're able to pick whether the person is auditory, visual, or kinesthetic, whether they're loner, team player, or talker, you can relate to them in that manner and you'll be able to influence them immediately because they'll trust you. They think that you are like them and you understand them. And in any kind of relationship, that is so valuable. And of course, there are heaps of other applications in sales, in leadership, if you have teams, in marriage, just understanding how to relate to each other. If you have people on these different ends of the scale, even different of these, married to each other, it's so valuable because as long as you can find a way to relate, you cover all the bases. You know what can go wrong, but you're also optimistic. You know what'll look good, but you also know what's comfortable. Does that make sense? It's good. Being different's good as long as we understand each other's differences and we don't get caught in what we would like the other person to be more like us. Does that make sense to you all? Okay, excellent. So, how many visual people, how many auditory people, how many kinesthetic people out of 10? Well, 4 visual, 4 kinesthetic, and 2 auditory. Now, what I found really interesting, I have no research, this is just my own experience. I lived in the UK for a few years, and in the UK, I thought that there were more visual people and less kinesthetic people. But in Australia, I think there are more kinesthetic people, more comfortable, want to get a gut feel of each other, and sometimes touchy-feely people, even though it's not really touching each other. Does that make sense? But that's just my own experience. So people mastery is to put that stuff together and to be able to pick someone else and be able to adapt your own behavior to fit with them. So I've already covered all of that. Living an extraordinary life involves having an ability to get along with other people, to relate successfully to them, and to maintain happy relationships with some of them. And the some of them, pick good people to relate to. Pick people who make you feel good. And so thank you very much and see you next week for the final chapter.